This is Cragside, the country home of Lord Armstrong, which was named after Crag End Hill, which stretches above the impressive house and its large, pleasant forest garden. The house, which has been in the care of the National Trust since 1977, was originally a modest two-storey country lodge when built in 1863. It was subsequently extended by Norman Shaw, whose designs transformed it into an elaborate mansion in the Free Tudor style, and at one time Cragside included an astronomical observatory and a scientific laboratory. But its most famous claim to fame was for being the first house in the world to be lit using electricity. A hydraulic engine was installed in 1868 that powered labour-saving devices such as laundry equipment, a rotisserie and a hydraulic lift. 2 years later, water from one of the lakes was used to drive a Siemens dynamo in what was the world's first hydroelectric power station. The electricity it produced powered an arc lamp in the gallery in 1878. That arc lamp was replaced in 1880 by Joseph Swan's incandescent lamps in what Swan described as being the first proper installation of electric lighting. The generators, which also provided power for the farm buildings on the estate, were constantly extended and improved to match the increasing electrical demand. The part that impressed me most was the water-powered lift that was capable of lifting and lowering to and from the third floor no less. Despite all this notoriety, the over-the-top decor of this Victorian house is remarkable in that, barring a few of the lighter rooms, it defies me to say with much confidence that I could live there. It's all a bit too much splendour for me. But there is no arguing with the fact that the estate is beautifully looked after, and visitors can take a steady 15-mile-per-hour tour around the 6-mile estate drive, which is exactly what we did. All the rhododendrons were out, and the damp of the day somehow enhanced that Scottish look on the plentiful rocks and trees, despite the estate being firmly located south of the border. And so we passed through on our destination to Granary Cottage in Lowick. The cottage, incidentally, was literally just once a grain store for the village. We were off in search of St Cuthbert's Cave, although this proved abortive because the path from the car park reaches a T-junction halfway up the side of the ridge, and the direction to the cave is not signposted. Although the cave is on this route, it is situated nowhere near the stretch we were taking in the fresh country air anyway. Having set off without any reference pictures or prior knowledge, I took some photographs of a couple of almost likely little holes in some rocky outcrops near the ridge. At least the scenery up there was beautiful. The sun was out, the sky was blue, only a few clouds spoilt the view. In the distance to the west, you can see the row of hills that comprise the Cheviots, including one huge lump called the Cheviot itself, which at over 2,600 feet above sea level is 2/3 the height of Ben Nevis and 3/4 that of Scafell Pike, England's highest mountain. The Cheviot is one for a future climb, methinks. And for the record, this is what the cave actually looks like, and this is the view you had from it. Absolutely nothing like where we were near. After our walk, we went to hit the coast and stopped off first at Budle Bay, which was quite pretty in the sunshine. We next travelled to Bamborough on the coast. The magnificent castle strikingly rises above the village, and on this day the gold and copper-coloured stones were bathed in the bright summer sun. We had a look at Bamborough village itself and ate a hearty 2-course meal and a Lord Crew, which was £10 a head. Mum and Dad started off with prawn and crayfish salads, while I had pâté with salad, with a measly 2 oatmeal biscuits. We followed that, with Mum and Dad having roast beef and veg, while I had good old fish and chips. I was determined to have fish and chips, I seem to remember. Lindisfarne is seen up the coast, and the Farne Islands could easily be made out directly opposite Bamborough. The closest was St Cuthbert's Chapel and the lighthouse easily visible, looking almost close enough to touch. Forecast is good for a lot of the country, but it seems the cloud will remain in our neck of the woods most of the week. We shall see. The once disputed border town of Berwick-upon-Tweed was originally the county town of Berwickshire. Between 1174 and 1482 the town changed hands between England and Scotland no less than 13 times. Its strategic position on the English-Scottish border during centuries of war between the two nations and its relatively great wealth led to a succession of raids, sieges and takeovers. By the 13th century, Berwick was one of the most wealthy trading ports in Scotland and was compared to Alexandria in trading importance, providing an annual customs value equivalent to a quarter of all customs revenues received from the whole of Scotland. Amongst the town's exports were wool, grain and salmon, while merchants from Germany and the Low Countries set up businesses in the town in order to trade. However, Berwick appended its signature to King John Balliol's new treaty with France, England's old enemy, and on the 30th of March 1296, King Edward I stormed Berwick after a prolonged siege, sacking it with much bloodshed. This most brutal of sackings saw his army slaughter almost everyone who resided in the town, even if they fled to the churches. Some 8,000 inhabitants are reckoned to have been put to the sword. This set the precedent for the bitter border conflicts of the Scottish Wars of Independence, where, during one such occasion, King John personally attended to witness the rather barbarous razing of the town. Although most of Berwick Castle was demolished in the 19th century to make way for the railway, the military barracks, built between 1717 and 1721, do remain, and are now maintained by English Heritage. In 1482 the town was captured by Richard, Duke of Gloucester, the future King Richard III, and although not officially merged into England, Berwickshire had the unique distinction of being the only county in the British Isles to be named after a town in another country. England has administered the town since its date, although the county of Berwickshire was officially abolished in 1975. During the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, vast sums were spent on its fortifications in a new Italian style, designed both to withstand artillery and to facilitate its use from within the fortifications. One source puts the cost at a then staggering £128,648, which, if true, made these the most expensive undertaking of the Elizabethan period. They are the best surviving example of town walls from that period in Europe, and although they were built on top of walls originating from long before that, even in Elizabethan times they were never truly finished. Contention about whether the town belonged to England or Scotland was finally ended in 1707 by the union of the two, although mutterings rumble on today about the merits of rejoining Scotland, possibly prompted by the perception of better services available north of the border. The old bridge across the Tweed, ordered by James VI of Scotland, was built by the Turnpike Trust between 1610 and 1624. This 15-span sandstone arch structure replaced various failed structures from over the preceding centuries. From Berwick we hit north again and crossed the border to reach the intriguingly sounding coastal town of Eyemouth. And one in the eye it was too. We all said how much we didn't want to return to it in a hurry. The harbour was the best part, and that wasn't saying much, although we all agreed that the building over the river deserved the restoration being bestowed upon it. A pity then that the same could not be said of the rest of the town. The houses were dull, and the paintwork did little to lift many out of the overall drabness that pervaded the town, rather like coal dust would from a nearby colliery, had one been present. Even the new estates on the outskirts screamed for some life-giving decor. It is not too much to say that Eyemouth was a bit of an eyesore, and the ice cream was not the best in Britain either. In need of some refreshment, we ambled up the coast a few miles to St Abb's Head, situated in a rather picturesque bay with rocks and a pleasant harbour. All in all, St Abb's Head was a lot more inviting than Eyemouth, which we had to pass through on the way back home. The lady we met in the morning had had her prayers answered, at least in part. Lowick and the surrounding area had been drenched by a heavy shower. Dinner was bangers, mash and baked beans. The bangers bought in a little butcher's shop called Skelly's near the top of the high street in Berwick. It was a glorious start to the day, sunshine bleeding through every available orifice in the curtains, and thoroughly warming the house even before 8 AM. The folks wanted to take me to Warkworth Castle, indeed today that was our first stop. We first went through the lovely village of Warkworth that greets you as you cross the river. We'll take a look at the village later and the old bridge that we entered the village on, but first the main attraction, the castle itself. The castle is built on the high ground to the south of the town, on raised ground in a loop of the River Coquette, and it is one of the most complete ruins you'll find. The original Motte and Bailey castle on this site was built in the mid-12th century by Earl Henry of Northumberland, and he was the King of Scots David I. Now in 1157, King Henry II recovered Northumberland from the Scots, and in the following year he gave Warkworth Castle to Roger FitzRichard. But it is with the Percy family, who acquired the castle in 1332, that the castle is most famously associated. The Percys were one of the most powerful families in the country, and they controlled much of northern England. Their major place of residence was the castle nearby Alnwick, yet despite that they frequently spent time at Warkworth and made big improvements to the castle. The most notable enhancement was the addition of the Great Keep in the northernmost point, which is one of the finest you'll find in this country. The Outer Bailey developed over the centuries the castle was in use as fashions and requirements changed. Carrickfergus Tower on the western side of the gatehouse is semi-octagonal, and the 15th century Montague Tower to the east is squarer. The ornately decorated lion tower provided an entrance to the hall, and also access from the hall to the Collygate Church. However, the church was never completed, but the foundations have survived and can be seen today. In contrast to the more haphazard style of planning by the various generations of owners, or indeed the lack of it, the keep was built in one go as a single unit during the late 14th century. The advanced design provided impressive accommodation, as well as signifying how worthy a status symbol the castle was of a family as powerful as the Percys. Within the outer bailey, various foundations and existing wall sections indicate the location of the domestic quarters from the original castle, including a chapel next to the gatehouse, a solar, and a hall along the west curtain wall. But for all their wealth and power, the Percys didn't have it all their own way, for power struggles brought them into frequent conflict with the monarchy, and on several occasions the castle returned to royal control. But with their influence so great, a Percy was normally reinstated soon afterwards. Henry, the sixth Earl Percy, left the castle and all his possessions to Henry VIII on his death in 1537, and this was a turning point in the fortunes with regard to Warkworth. Because the Percys were Catholic, subsequent attempts to reinstate a Percy brought misfortune on the castle as they came into conflict with Queen Elizabeth, who was, of course, Protestant after her father. A failed uprising of the Northern Earls against the Queen led to the execution of the 7th Earl in 1572, and to the pillaging of the castle by the Queen's servants. The Percys more or less gave up, and the castle was subsequently allowed to fall into decay. Rising to a height of 3 stories, the polygonal keep with its tall central watchtower appears impressive from any angle, and even today tends to dominate the site. Many of the principal buildings contained within Warkworth Castle have survived remarkably well, and the rooms in the keep were still in use by the owners well into the 20th century. These rooms are indeed open at certain times, but typically, the day we were there, they weren't. A pleasant walk through the town allowed the heart of Warkworth to betray itself to us. We found 3 pubs, 2 hotels and a number of cafes, restaurants and tea rooms, of course, plus a chocolate shop and patisserie, as well as a general store. There was also several galleries and boutiques to be found. Crossing the river is the modern road bridge built in 1965, which replaced the original twin-arch structure that still looks impressive today. It has a fortified tower at the town end. And so with that we drove into the unremarkable looking Amble, which holds the title Friendliest Port, believe it or not. This moniker derives from the 1930s when the RMS Mauretania was heading on her last voyage to the breakers yard at Rosyth, and the Amble Town Council sent a telegram to the ship saying, "Still the finest ship on the seas." The Mauretania replied with greetings, "To the last and friendliest port in England." A bit further down, we looked over the sand dunes to Coquette Island with its lonely lighthouse, just as calm and so cool as it has been before. We turned back to investigate Alnmouth, which proved every bit as lovely as Amble was not, and where we found the elusive cup of tea. The menu included the intriguingly named Northumberland broth, which the owner admitted was nothing more than what he happened to have to be boiling up on the pot on the day, and why not? Craster was the very next place on our itinerary, A place to park the car if you want to take the 2-kilometre hike along the coast path to the magnificent ruin of Dunstanburgh Castle. But by this time of the day it was well turned 4 o'clock, and it was too late to attempt even that. The way back home was briefly interrupted by our stopping to photograph a steaming pool, with wasps of sea mist evolving above our heads. We almost went to Jedburgh this morning, but having deemed that too far, we headed off for Ford and Etal, or as locals pronounce the two villages, Ford and Etal. The closely knit villages lie among the Etal estate, of which Ford Castle is privately owned and wasn't accepting visitors. The Grade 1 listed building of Etal Castle, now in the care of English Heritage, was, so we started off here. The castle started out as a 3-storey tower house founded by the de Manners family in the late 12th century, but its location near the border with Scotland made it vulnerable to attack. So in 1341, Robert de Manners, the nobleman and doctor, received a licence to redesignate it as a castle. He did this by creating a roughly square courtyard enclosed with curtain walls and put the existing tower house in one corner. Directly opposite he placed a large gatehouse, and new towers were placed in the remaining 2 corners. The tower house itself was vastly improved with the addition of another storey and crenellations, and the remains of this now form the centre of the ruin we see today. Etal Castle was renowned as a destination for pilgrims who sought medical and dental treatment from de Manners, who was known throughout the region as a healer. However, the family quite often feuded with the local Heron family from Ford Castle nearby, and in one such bloody attack on Etal in 1428, its leader, Sir William Heron, was killed. With the union of the English and Scottish crowns in 1603, Etal ceased to have any military importance, and the decay, which had already set in, was allowed to continue unabated. The pleasant morning we'd had so far ended at the lavender tea rooms in a village store cum post office. The next historical landmark of the day was of course Flodden Field. This large expanse on an ambling slope was where, on the 9th of September 1513, an invading Scots army under King James IV faced an English army commanded by the Earl of Surrey. It was the largest battle, in terms of numbers, fought between the two nations. The army of some 20,000 hastily recruited Northerners would attempt to ward off the 30,000 marauding Scots. It was a decisive and bloody battle. The English generals stayed behind the lines in the Renaissance style. The biggest error the Scots made was placing their officers in the front line medieval style, and with the loss of so many Scottish officers in the savage exchange, there was no one left to coordinate any kind of retreat, and so their invasion of England ground to a halt. A pathetic and dried out tiny thistle reef rustled in the breeze as it leaned against the lonely stone cross that marks the middle of the battle site. We ended up back at Branxton village, where we found the little church of St. Paul's, where the slain were brought during and after battle. The leader of the Scots, Henry IV, who'd felt compelled to wade in and help shore up the weakened and disorganised Scottish ranks, is also believed to have been brought back here, after which he died from his injuries. It took a while to get to Kelso, thanks to the local authorities' dig up the road scheme to congest traffic plan. But once we did, we found the town's 4 inner feeder roads to the town square cobbled by black brick, an extremely unusual feature. The town itself came into being as a direct result of the creation of the abbey in 1128, and which, in the following years, became one of the finest examples of Romanesque architecture. When the building was finished, it was dedicated to the Blessed Virgin and St. John in 1243, and soon became one of the largest and richest abbeys in Scotland, its wealth coming from its vast lands, churches, schools, farms and granges in the Cheviot Hills. It was of high importance. In the 12th and 13th centuries, the abbot of Kelso was granted the right to wear a mitre. This gave him a precedence higher than any other Scottish abbot. With the Reformation and Henry VIII's determination to wipe out the border abbeys, it wasn't to last, and by 1550 the abbey at Kelso, along with those at Melrose, Dryborough and Jedburgh, had been reduced to rubble by the English forces under the Earl of Hertford. The abbey ruins were plundered as a source of ready-hewn stone for buildings elsewhere in Kelso, and today only a substantial portion of the western end is left standing. Afternoon tea was provided by a little tea shop that specialised in organic and fair trade produce where possible. And after that we picked up some veg and summerfields to accompany the steak pie bought earlier in a nice looking deli cum meat shop. Homeward bound entailed the usual ducking and diving down diversions galore until we reached Tweezel Bridge. Nearby is the remains of Tweezel Castle, and curiously an old station, but with time against us we weren't able to investigate those. The soundly structured medieval Tweezel Bridge over the River Rill was probably the safest bet for the English to cross over while chasing the invading Scots back to their home territory. As with many stone-arched bridges in the region, whose history dates back many hundreds of years, this bridge was usurped by a more modern road bridge taking traffic to and from Berwick-upon-Tweed, not so many miles from here. The river below curved gently under some cliffs on the downstream side, but it wasn't always like this. Indeed, the cliff's steep sides displayed much evidence of being carved out over many millennia from the powerfully flowing torrent it undoubtedly once was. The carvings easily seen at a point many feet above the current river level. We were initially unaware of a heron waiting patiently by a weir in the curve before being scared off by our presence. Dad just about got a photo of it in flight before it disappeared into the trees. We decided to get up this morning to go across to Lindisfarne, or Holy Island as we 21st century simpletons call it. A causeway connects the island to the mainland of Northumberland and is flooded twice a day by the tides. Warning signs urge visitors walking to the island to keep to the marked path, to check tide times and the weather carefully, and also seek local advice if in any doubt. As Sir Walter Scott described it, for with the flow and ebb its style varies from continent to isle. Dry shod o'er sands, twice every day, the pilgrims to the shrine find way. Twice every day the wells efface, of staves and sandalled feet the trace. The castle is owned by the National Trust, so the year membership I'd bought at Crags on our first day is now starting to pay dividends. The castle stands on a rocky outcrop at the southeastern corner of the island. It was extensively redesigned as a retreat in the earlier part of the 20th century by architect extraordinaire Van Lutyens. With its twisting and turning corridors, stairwells and passages, the small castle comes across as something much larger, which is a triumph of design in such a restricted living space. One of the most celebrated gardeners of modern times, Gertrude Jekyll, laid out the tiny garden just north of the castle in 1911. The castle garden and nearby lime kilns are in the care of the National Trust and open to all visitors. The island of Lindisfarne was mainly a fishing community for many years, with farming and the production of lime also of some importance. The quarrying of lime flourished during the Industrial Revolution in the mid-19th century, when over 100 men were employed. Crinoid colonels extracted from the quarried stone and threaded into necklaces or rosaries became known as St. Cuthbert's beads. The lime kilns are amongst the most complex in the county, and traces of the jetties by which the coal was imported and the lime exported can be found close by at the foot of the Crags. During our time on the island, the sun had not burnt off the low cloud that had persisted, save for the occasional blob of blue sky. These became more numerous while we toured the priory, which is run by English Heritage. We could have just walked in there, and indeed we suspected many did exactly that because, as it turned out on asking, they were short-staffed. Lindisfarne Monastery was founded by the Irish monks in Aidan, who had been sent from Iona off the west coast of Scotland to Northumbria at the request of King Oswald, circa 1635. It became the base for Christian evangelising in the north of England, from where a successful mission was sent to Mercia. Northumberland's patron saint, Cuthbert, was a monk, later abbot of the monastery, and he later became Bishop of Lindisfarne. Cuthbert was buried here, and his miracles and life were recorded by the Venerable Bede. Lindisfarne is well known for mead. In the medieval days, when monks inhabited the island, it was thought that if the soul was in God's keeping, the body must be fortified with Lindisfarne mead. The monks have long since vanished, and the mead's recipe remains a secret of the family which still produces it at St Aidan's winery, and it is sold throughout the UK and elsewhere. Recently, Lindisfarne became the centre for the revival of Celtic Christianity in the north of England. A former minister of the church there, David Adam, is a well-known author of Celtic Christian books and prayers. Following from this, Lindisfarne has become a popular retreat centre as well as a holiday destination. Halidon Hill was another English-Scottish battle site, this time from 1533. Apart from a car park, there was very little else to go and see, except where everything happened thanks to a detailed history board and a great where everything is pointer. Best of all was a good vantage point for a photograph of Berwick-upon-Tweed from the northeast, and another opportunity to realise just how crap my camera really is with the lack of a decent zoom, never mind its measly 2 gigapixels. Dad favoured going back to Lavender Tea Rooms at Etel, where he'd had a good cheese and onion toastie just the day before. But there were a couple of other chances. First we made for Churnside, but saw only pubs and inns and no tea room. But it was a nice looking place to live nonetheless. Paxton Country Park was next on Plan B. This is a privately owned house and estate open to the public. However, you didn't pay a charge at all if all you wanted was refreshment in the Stables Cafe. With a span of 137 metres or 449 feet, the Union Bridge was the longest wrought iron suspension bridge in the world when it opened on the 26th of July 1820. It was built by Naval Captain Samuel Brown, using chains to suspend the deck over the River Tweed between Horncliffe in England and Fyshwick on the Scottish borders. Captain Brown knew that a wooden sailing ship is not totally rigid, and so he designed the bridge on the same basis, which may account for its longevity. The bridge saved many travellers an 11-mile round trip downstream via Berwick-upon-Tweed or a 20-mile upstream trip via Coldstream. It remained in use as the oldest suspension bridge in the world that still carried traffic. A landslip on the steep-sided English forced its closure in December 2008, and this order appears to remain in place today. After a bit of a lie-in on a grey Friday morning, we went off in a southwesterly direction to Wooler, with people going about their business on the last working day of the week. Drizzle set in as we stopped for the proverbial mid-morning coffee. Well, Dad had the coffee, the rest of us indulged in hot chocolates with cream and marshmallows. After Wooler, we looked for Hamilton Hill, site of a battle in 1402, but all we could find was a stone in a farmer's field surrounded by sheep. It was in the right position, at least according to the map, so we all took pickies from the road, as we do. Dismissing going on to Jedburgh and finding the privately owned Lilburn Tower inaccessible, we stumbled across a significant War of the Roses battle site of Hedgeley Moor. It was rather disappointing to see little made of it. Foliage was creeping ever more over a wooded enclosure that included the only two sizable information signs that you could see, plus 2 rocks which, as legend has it, are those that one of the side's leader and horse vaulted over in a bid to escape. Most visitors to Northumberland will know of the grim and bloody history of this border county, but seldom will they receive so vivid an impression of its reality as at Preston Peel Tower. This was built between 1392 and 1399, when warfare between England and Scotland was endemic, and at the time of Agincourt in 1415 it was one of 78 Peel Towers in Northumberland alone. The tower's owners included Sir Guiscard Harbottle, who was slain fighting against James IV at the Battle of Flodden in 1513. The conflict, of course, that brought Mary Queen of Scots to the Scottish throne. Sir Nicholas Pevsner, the famous architectural historian, described Preston Tower as amongst the most spectacular pieces of medieval masonry in England. The large stone blocks used in its 7-foot thick walls bear the same mason's marks as those at Warkworth Castle. On the ground floor you can visit the guardroom and prison, while the first floor has a bedroom and living room, furnished as they might have been around 1400. The views from the top of the tower are spectacular, and one can imagine what it was like to be dropping unpleasant objects onto attackers below. The gardens around the house provide a peaceful and attractive setting for the Peel Tower. There are 3 short walks in the grounds and nearby woodland that allow visitors to see some of the interesting trees and shrubs, which include tulip trees, walnuts and a ginkgo bilboa. Sea houses became the final destination while we were looking for something to eat, and as we edged closer the weather closed in more and more with increased doses of drizzle as we approached the coast. We ate there and then, and mainly because it was some 7 hours since our kippers in the morning for breakfast, and Dad does get a little scratchy if he fails to eat regularly, although of course he'll bite your head off telling you that he doesn't, hasn't and isn't, so there. The trip back to base took us back up the coast and was gloomily mist-laden for most of the way. The mist was thickest as we passed Bamborough Castle for the last time, and yet the building still looked magnificent as it towered above us and up into the low-lying cloud. It was apparent Lowick had seen some heavy rainfall during the latter part of the day, and all in all, this was an indication of how dull this final day of the holiday had been weather-wise. It was still misty in the morning as we prepared to load our bags into the back of Dad's rather nice car ready for the trip home. Despite that, he's still happy about something, and at last we get the picture we are looking for, although what he was happy about we still don't really know. The sky is grey and low cloud clings to the high peaks around. Perhaps as a sign of things to come weather-wise in this region, we may be doing the right thing by making for home. Instead of passing Newcastle on this road, we opted to detour round the east side on the A19 and travel instead through the Tyne Tunnel. This was in fact the route for the A1 for a time before the Newcastle's western bypass route was finally constructed, taking some strain off this two-way drain under the river. Traffic levels have still progressed though, and like the Dartford M25 crossing down south, a new dual-lane bridge was being constructed over the Tyne to complement this original lengthy, twisty and turny two-way tunnel, which must be quite overwhelmed during the business week with traffic. comprehensive roadworks at either end were quite advanced, and the resulting new crossing should shore up current transport requirements for some time to come at least. Through the gloom we spied something reminiscent of the temple in Athens, albeit a half-sized replica. Set between the districts of Washington and Houghtonleigh Spring, we parked up right next to a garden centre and walked up Penshaw Hill to discover that these columns were in fact the Earl of Durham's monument. It was designed by John and Benjamin Green and built by Thomas Pratt of Sunderland in 1844, using gritstone that came from the Marquis of Londonderry's quarries on the east coast. The Folly is dedicated to John George Lambton, the first Earl of Durham and the first Governor of the Province of Canada. In September 1939, John Lambton, the 5th Earl of Durham, presented Penshaw Monument to the National Trust as a gift. Incidentally, the monument features on the club badge of Sunderland AFC. And so began the last stretch of our journey home. Further down the A19 through County Durham, just level with Northallerton, we pulled into Mount Grace Priory. This was another suitable location to use my new National Trust membership card. At least it would have been had we not experienced a freak accident in the car park. The explosion of shattering glass shocked us all, especially Mother, who was sitting right next to it. Had the weather held up, we would have seen the ruins of the Priory, and so I make no apologies for including these photographs in lieu of visiting them sometime in the future. Because the car's back door was bent, the insurance company said a temporary screen would not do at all, and that meant we had to make the rest of the journey home on the recovery wagon from a local garage. Our driver was Paul, who often did these long-distance trips. All I can say is the lengths that Dad went to in order to stop me getting behind the wheel of his car. Oh well, there's always something on a Barrett holiday. We finally crawled home to Suffolk in bright sunshine some 5 hours later.